The video footage is eerie, shaky, and a bit jarring. I was walking East Cowpen Trail in Georgia's Cohutta Wilderness area at 4 o'clock on All Hallows Eve 2016. Somewhere beyond these trees, concealed by autumn foliage and the heights of Rough Ridge, a menace prowled. That menace had been creeping through the woods east of Rough Ridge, largely unnoticed by the public. But it crept no more. 2 seasons of hot weather and historic drought had turned every dead twig and branch, each pine cone and log, into fuel. Now colorful, tender, dry autumn leaves were falling, adding fuel to the fire ignited by lightning 15 days earlier. In 2 days, the U.S. Forest Service would close the trail we had just walked up and the one we were about to walk down. 2 days after that, it closed the entire Cohutta Wilderness area. The fire measured hundreds of acres by Halloween and burned 27,000 more over the next 5 weeks. But it was smoke that brought fame to the Rough Ridge fire. Autumn winds carried thick, pungent clouds south and east, choking Jasper and Atlanta, Gainesville and Dahlonega, or west to Chattanooga and Huntsville. For weeks it seemed like North Georgia's mountains were ablaze. Public health agencies issued air quality warnings, recreation departments canceled soccer practices, and high schools considered canceling football games. Firefighting crews came from as far as Florida, New Jersey, Oregon, Alaska, and Puerto Rico. Nearly 300 firefighters relied on sheer manpower to confine the blaze to the wilderness area. But on Halloween Day, that was still weeks away. The mountain was tranquil, the autumn leaves dazzled, and a flawless blue sky showed only a hint of hazy smoke. There was little reason to suspect that the modest woodland fire would suddenly leap beyond its current perimeter, especially since seasonal wet weather would arrive any day. But November didn't bring rain. The Cohutta Mountains were experiencing exceptional drought. Day after day, week after week, the sun blazed in a cloudless sky, searing the mountains with unseasonable 80-degree heat. I didn't know about the fire when I started hiking that Halloween morning. Then a small breeze worked down a Buckeye Mountain draw, carrying a pleasant hint of wood smoke, as if early rising campers were preparing breakfast. I mentioned this to my hiking companion, Shepherd Howell. Our first stop that morning was the old Preacher Hall homestead. Shepherd showed me a photo taken here a century ago of a cabin, a barn, and cleared fields, where there's now just forest. He kicked around in the leaf litter and found a few pieces of iron and, incredibly, a remnant of old shoe leather. We crossed several small streams. Shepherd paused at one Laurel City branch to scoop sweet drinking water with his collapsible metal cup. The Conasauga River was lower than I had ever seen it. It usually looks more like this photo taken in June 2021. The trail passes through Brayfield, site of a Conasauga River Lumber Company camp from the 1930s. 100 years ago, an extensive railroad network was built into these mountains to facilitate the harvesting of virgin timber. We crossed the Conasauga twice without wetting our shoes and noticed that upstream smoke hazed the air. Then we ascended Cowpen Mountain on Panther Creek Trail, its namesake creek resolutely thumbing its nose at the drought. Here and there, Howell pointed at shaded pools where trout had once risen to take his lures. On the mountainside, the effects of the drought were dramatic. Rhododendron leaves lacked their typical luster. Hardwood foliage on Cathead Bluff and Painter Bluff looked pale and sickly, and the needles in a pine grove on a rocky Cowpen knob were dying. At the top of the mountain, we got our first look at the Rough Ridge fire through a gap in the woods. Charcoal gray smoke boiled up from the far side of the ridge like storm clouds in a squall line. The fire looked more ominous than we had expected. It was gaining momentum. During its first 2 weeks, it had burned less than 1,000 acres. On Halloween, it mushroomed to nearly 2,000. Just before New Year's Eve, 2 months later, we returned and did the same loop in reverse. The police tape was gone. The autumn leaves that had flickered yellow and flamed orange were no more. The scourge that had passed through the countryside had burned out. The hardwood forest, battered by months of drought and 6 weeks of wildfire, seemed scarred and desolate. Late November and December rainfall had done much to relieve the drought. The creeks and rivers looked healthier, but the fire had done its work, searing the rhododendron jungles and killing some trees. In some places, inches of slick, wet ash covered steep slopes, making descents like walking down a metal slide coated with buttery oatmeal. We slipped a time or two before learning to recognize and avoid those places. When I returned to the trail in May 2017, the Conasauga River again carried a robust flow, and verdant ferns and lush new growth had reclaimed the charred slopes. Trees killed or weakened by the fire soon began to fall, and are still doing so even today, making a mess of the Cohutta Wilderness Area trail system. This photo was taken on the East Cowpen Trail in November 2022, and this one shows young Virginia pine growth beginning to close across the trail. The forest is gradually mending, with lush plant growth reclaiming thousands of singed acres, but in some places the devastation remains evident, as at Jacks River Falls. The forested mountainsides look like a bomb exploded, and I'll never again see it like it was in the 1990s and early 2000s. But my children, if they're fortunate, might see it again, just like that, when they reach my age. Thank you for watching this Georgia Backroads program.